Hello and welcome to The Stack. On this week's show, we sit down with the editor-in-chief of the Kyiv Independent, and we speak with celebrated creative director and graphic designer Richard Turley. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. To start the show, I welcomed in the studio someone that I'm a big fan of, Richard Turley, the renowned creative director and graphic designer, known for his incredible covers for Bloomberg Businessweek, and now his work as editorial and design director for Interview magazine. Turley is also the founder of creative agency Food. We spoke about magazines, his work, and the design revamp he worked on for Rolling Stone magazine. Let's have a listen.
I'm editorial and design director of Interview. I work with artists. I'm collaborating at the moment with a gallery in Lower East Side, in Manhattan. I have my own agency, Food, which we kind of, we do work through. I have a lot of hustles.
Which is great, it's perfect for a show like this.
Yeah.
And you did mention Interview there, and I have to say, I think Interview in the last years have been brilliant. I mean,
thank you.
In a way, I was not there at the time when Andy Warhol, launched the magazine, but it feels like it has the same spirit. How do you see? Because it had a few iterations throughout the years, right?
It's had a lot of iterations. We're actually just about to do our 50. I mean, it's not really so much a kind of anniversary, 55 years, but it's been going for 55 years. Yeah, and through many different iterations, but the Warhol thing is very deliberate. That was something I think that we felt was missing from a few iterations, or rather the iteration that we picked up from, which was, I don't know, maybe it's like 5 or 6 years ago now, I forget. But yeah, no, it was, I mean, we didn't really give ourselves a brief, but kind of I think Mel and me really wanted to put the fun back into the magazine. I describe it as being a little Zoolander at the time. It was very fashion, very serious, and took itself a little too seriously. Lots of kind of black and white photography.
The blue steel look.
Yeah. And it just felt it just was a little chilly, and I think we wanted to warm it up, and we wanted to to reintroduce some humor and some wink, and just make the experience of looking through a magazine a joyful thing, as opposed to something that, I suppose we were in Trump years then, but everything felt a little heavy, and we just wanted to give some brevity to people who choose to pick up the magazine. So yeah, it's a fun magazine. We don't take ourselves too seriously. I think sometimes we like low-key sort of make fun of people who kind of want to be in the magazine. I think we're kind of in the spirit of kind of irreverence and fun and humor and kind of pointing fingers, but equally sort of taking it quite seriously at the same time, that kind of balance that magazines, I think, used to do quite well, maybe not so much anymore. But yeah, no, I've been doing that for a few years now.
But the thing with Interview, I think, for me at least, it creates the excitement, like who is going to be on the cover of the next issue. And I have to say, not many magazines have this power, at least from my perspective these days. But I think with Interview, there is also that thing, because, you generally attract all the top celebrities, but as you said, in a very irreverent and fun way, not the traditional, perhaps, Vogue cover or something like that.
It took time to get to that point. There's definitely, now I think it's a lot easier to book a cover than it was, when we first started. I think, as there's any, new iteration, people are kind of waiting to understand a little bit more about it and kind of waiting for it to settle. But it took it took a few years, and there were a few kind of bumpy issues as there always are. But yeah, now it's very easy to book that cover for sure, and it's become. I think that we just understood the importance of the cover and the importance of that image to be a very powerful unit of currency in how the magazine's kind of perceived and shared. We still, we work harder on our print magazine than ever, but the print magazine is really a small part of actually how people experience the issue and how people experience the content that we have. But the cover is a very, very valuable resource, and keep it special and keep it kind of sacred, and and really invest a lot of time and energy in how that image comes together, and then also how it travels. So it's not an accident.
From your perspective, Richard, for example, when it comes to a magazine like Interview, who do you think is buying the magazine? Because, I've been to a few newsstands, and depending on who is on the cover as well, I feel that the young generation is also very keen to buy that, be it a physical media, a new album, a new vinyl, or a magazine. Do you feel that? Or perhaps I'm wrong, and actually it's the older people that actually buy it?
I wish I had a smart answer to that. And my answer may be surprising in that I don't think it matters who buys your magazine anymore. I don't think the amount of copies matters anymore. What matters, and it's a strange thing in a way, is that we produce a print magazine, and that there is an image on the front of that magazine, and that gives weight to the image that you've just been talking about. Essentially what we're talking about in terms of the Interview cover is a JPEG, or it's a PNG file that appears on Instagram, right? It's that is the unit that you're kind of talking about, and without a print magazine attached to it, somehow it has less value. I don't quite understand that. I don't know if that's going to be the same way that many years into the future, but it's still significant, and I think it's still a very important part of how we book covers, that there is a print magazine attached to it, and that it has some kind of longevity, and it has kind of substance to me. I mean, I joked around the time we did a Rihanna cover recently, and I was just saying, we only really need to produce one cover of this and get her to hold it up, and it validates the whole thing. I mean, every magazine I now have kind of attachments to. The newsstand sales are of very small importance to both the business model and the way that the magazine thinks about itself, which is quite a big pivot from a few years ago for sure. It's not to say that, the Interview does badly, but then we make it quite hard to get hold of. We make it physically, you have to kind of struggle. You have to either subscribe, or you have to kind of to really know where to go to get that magazine. And again, there wasn't a ton of kind of thinking when we made those decisions about not being in airports, not being kind of, not paying to be sort of in America, kind of CVS and kind of like pharmacies essentially, which is a lot of people buy magazines now. That decision was quite deliberate, and, to do something that, if you want it, you got to have to work a little hard to get it. And even though you don't have to work hard at all to find out what's in the magazine, because you can just look at any number of social media things. They've got a website, so
but it's worth it. If you find a copy, it's worth it.
It's a good magazine. It's definitely good. We had a lovely video was sent to us recently about someone who, actually a kid, so difficult to exactly tell how old, but looked pretty young, who'd kind of covered her walls with pages from Interview. So, we hit the right people buy it, the right people understand it, and magazines are in some senses a little bit like a kind of a club that you join, a kind of community that you join, and if you get it, you get it.
Well, let's talk to another iconic title that you've been working very recently, because it's the redesign of the American Rolling Stone, which is a title that I've been reading since the 90s. And of course, again, a few iterations, a few changes here and there. But the Shakira cover, when I saw it online, I don't know, the first word that came to mind was delicious.
Oh?
Not Shakira necessarily, but the colors. But you know what I mean? It just popped.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's nice. I was asked to do that at the back end of last year. We were we started that project, and it's been great. It's been really good. I mean, it's funny. Rolling Stone wasn't a magazine I had a kind of a real connection with. I mean, being kind of English, I think you're always aware of Rolling Stone, and it's always been it's kind of iconic, obviously. But it wasn't like I was redesigning something that I had a very intimate relationship with. But yeah, we were asked to do it, and they wanted. I think they wanted a bit of Interview actually in a way. They wanted to sort of, I think the kind of, and a lot of my work actually has been about taking kind of old brands, or taking kind of old titles, or taking kind of businesses that need a little bit freshen up. It needed some kind of revitalization. I think Rolling Stone fell very strongly into that category of, a magazine that had a ton of really great content and really produces an awful lot of kind of journalism. but that wasn't necessarily represented in the magazine, and that's kind of through no fault of theirs, but they just kind of chose a route, which I think a lot of people have done, which is, well, people don't really read magazines, so we'll just keep all the really special stuff for the magazine, and we'll kind of just strip it back and make it into a book or whatever, or kind of really kind of think about it from that. And I've always thought that was a really dumb thing to do. I think you have to make a compelling case for yourself. I think people want to buy a packed magazine that has kind of life to it, that has ideas, that has features, which isn't just some sort of, kind of very simple, stripped down kind of idea of the best journalism of the month or whatever, and actually kind of is able to talk a little bit more fluidly or about all the, about every kind of touch point. And that's certainly true of Rolling Stone. I one of the first observations about that magazine is there's a lot of bait. There's an American term, bait and switch. You bait with Shakira, and then you switch, and it's just tons of like
an interview with Kamala Harris. I mean,
exactly. Well,
incredible.
No, they were spot on there. And it's actually a very, very kind of political magazine. It prides itself. I mean, the real pride the real joy that they have is that kind of political content, as well as the music, for sure. Don't get me wrong. And kind of what we did was what I was wanting to do with that. And I think what we sort of did is kind of look more like The Economist. I kind of, oddly, we were kind of like, we were way more interested in making it a really serious magazine and kind of putting, there was a lot of words in it, and the way they coped with the words beforehand was to make the font size quite small. And we were like, well, we just threw the font size up quite a lot, so we made it more readable. We made it more of a, more accessible, I think, which kind of means that you sort of, as soon as you do that, you really have to deal with words in a way that a lot of magazines don't now. I mean, where they just kind of make the picture big, and it's kind of, it's far less about the words because it is just kind of like a flick experience.
But Richard, actually, that's one of the changes that I felt that was apparent. It felt busier, and I like that, because I never forget a few years ago there was a Rolling Stone issue. It was the 100 songs that changed the world, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then in the magazine there's only the 25 songs, and then say to read the other 75 you can go online. I'm like, no, I wanted the 100 songs in there.
Yeah, I can't really speak to that, but I share the sentiment around. I think magazines should be busy, and I think there was this big mistake that a lot of magazines made in this kind of stripping out and kind of creating these. I don't think you'd describe it as like a bookazine, but I'm sure you know that phrase, and kind of the way that magazines became more and big, inverted commas here, kind of elegant, and kind of, and the one that kind of drives me crazy is, we're just going to really make use of photography and kind of, and fucking photography's everywhere, like you're not like lacking for kind of moments of photography in your day, aren't you? Because too much moments of photography. So actually kind of like so flipping that and kind of like making it very much about the words and the stories, and that, which meant that we kept the pictures big in places, but we also reduced the size of the pictures in a lot of places. The front of the magazine now is what I think they're calling a river, where it's all the kind of the stories are chained up, and so it's kind of very much like an old New Yorker or kind of Economist sort of strategy, which is actually ironically the same thing I did at Business Week, but it just kind of creates a much more serious and a much more kind of committed start to the magazine, I think, much more of a kind of a reading experience, and one that isn't, we had kind of two parts of that brief. One was just to modernize it, kind of create a more interesting kind of print magazine, but the other one's to make it easy to produce, because, the staff sizes now, the amount of time they, particularly that place is just, they're all so spread, like they make so much stuff all over the place, and so the kind of the magazine kind of needed to be a little bit easier to make. And so those strategies of just kind of reducing the complexity of the kind of the front of book and the back of book to a certain extent as well. You get both things. You get sort of a magazine that's a little bit more easy to produce, but also one that's denser and feels more of a reading experience.
And Richard, it's funny, you're a Brit, but you live in the US, so you've been working mainly with American magazines.
Yeah.
Recently, are there any cultural differences you feel? I mean, when you grab a copy of a title here in the UK and the US, I can see the differences clearly, but what do you have to say for that?
I don't think I see anything, I don't really, maybe I don't really look at enough magazines, honestly, at the moment to kind of to be really to be able to answer that question with any degree of sophistication. I think that Americans moreover take things a lot more seriously than we do, in a sense, and kind of and they work harder, and they're more. I don't want to say that we don't work hard, but kind of, when they ship kind of Rolling Stone, they're there till like 3-4 o'clock in the morning doing that stuff. They care. The amount of time and and kind of resources and just sort of passion that they put, and that kind of exists anywhere, everywhere really. This is not just magazines, but there's just a sort of more of a commitment, more of a kind of a seriousness about work over there. I think that maybe you pick up on a little bit more. I don't know if beyond that I don't think magazines in most places are very good. I think we've kind of lost our way, like they mean different things now, and I like zine. I much prefer kind of a kid's attempt at a magazine than a sort of middle-aged person's attempt at one.
Which there are quite a lot these days. I think there's a boom in
there
zines
is,
for sure.
Yeah. Which is sort of answering the question you posed earlier, really, about kind of why a magazine in some ways, or kind of like what's driving it and who's buying it. And I think I'm sure you've heard a lot of people on your on your podcast who are talking about like tactility and the importance of objects, and think that everything disappears on the internet, and kind of people wanting kind of longevity in some form, and kind of the equivalences to vinyl, all that stuff. And I think that's all true, on some level. I don't really have too much more to add to that in terms of nuance. I don't understand why magazines are still going, but they kind of are. They defy logic, they defy gravity on some level, and here we are. We're still talking about them. They still have some kind of cultural value, but they'll only have cultural value if they're good and culturally interesting, right? And so the job is to kind of keep on kind of sharpening that, and as much as you can in the face of a media landscape which is much more interested in short form video and self-generated media, and honestly I'm more interested in that stuff as well than most magazines.
Fair enough. But clearly you're a man interested. I want to ask you actually at the end about Nuts magazine, the title you published for food. How can you describe it? Because I know there's been one issue which is sold out apparently. Is it going to be a second?
There's one coming out in a few weeks actually, in September. So we got issue 2 of that. It's just a personal project, really. I did a newspaper before that called Civilization, and so it's a kind of an extension of that in some ways, or it's kind of it's a build on that. Civilization was really about words and about there were many different kind of principles behind it. One of which trying to kind of capture something of living in a city, which I didn't really feel that was being kind of addressed very well in print journalism, kind of up until then, and. It was also about just like words and frequency and sort of social media and how words are changing and language is changing, and trying to kind of create a sort of an equivalence in words to the sort of the frenzy that you get in social media and you get kind of, scrolling. But it didn't have any pictures in it. And then also kind of doing interview, which was, I've kind of orbited around fashion for a lot in my career, many times in my career. But like, interview is really the first time I've had to actually kind of really engage with it in a kind of more profound way. And so Nuts is a kind of me expressing a little bit of me, a bit more of me in kind of what my attitude is towards those kind of type of, that type of content. So it's ostensibly a fashion magazine, but it's not really. It's about language. It's about how words modify images. It's about the modern day condition. It's about me fucking around, for want of a better word, on kind of 500 pages, this huge kind of like Bible-sized issue, the next one. It's about kind of collaborating with a whole bunch of people throughout the world and kind of just seeing what happens and kind of sequencing that into something that is a midway between a sort of a zine and a book and a magazine, and sort of none of those things and all of those things at the same time.
Thank you very much, Richard. Always a pleasure. Love your work at the new Rolling Stone magazine and also interview, of course. The Kyiv Independent has autonomy at its heart. Set up in 2021, it was founded by former staff from the Kyiv Post, once Ukraine's leading English-language publication, who walked out after their freedom to critically report on the government of the day came under threat. Then the Kyiv Independent came face-to-face with another crisis, Russia's full-scale invasion of their country. But almost 3 years on, and the publication's newsroom is thriving. Monocle's Julia Lassica sat down with editor-in-chief Olga Rudenko in Kyiv to discuss the importance of English-language reporting on the ground and her plans for helping the paper to continue to grow.
There are so many challenges that you have to overcome that Ukrainian journalists writing in Ukrainian don't have to. How do you see your responsibility?
Yes, of course. Being a Ukrainian journalist writing in English for the Western audience is something quite different from being a Ukrainian journalist writing for Ukrainian audience. I have to be very much aware all the time that I'm talking to people who are not like myself, who don't have the same background, don't have the same understanding of Ukraine. And it's something you have to keep in mind all the time, because you're not writing for yourself or for people like you. You're writing for quite a different group, and you have to take that into account. You have to always think about how is this clear? Do I need to add something to it? Does it sound misleading because they don't have, some of the background is missing? So it's like you always want to be, putting on a cap of someone else when you're writing and trying to, put yourself in their place and understand what it would be seen like with their eyes. There is a lot of responsibility, of course, especially now with the full-scale war, because the world's eyes are on Ukraine, and we want to be, at the Kyiv Independent, we don't want to be like a PR agency for Ukraine. We don't want to be embellishing the image of Ukraine for the sake of rallying up support or something like that. No, we want to tell the truth about Ukraine, about what is happening, good and bad, and we think that, it adds up to, Ukraine does not need embellishing. I think that people sometimes think that we as Ukrainian journalists writing for the world about Ukraine in the time like this, that we are, by design, we want to, self-censor, we want to sugarcoat something to present a better image of Ukraine than it is. But we don't, we honestly don't. It's not what we believe in. It's not what we want to do. PR pays much better than journalism everywhere in the world. Basically, if we were trying to put out a better image than it is, to sugarcoat everything, I think the story of the Kyiv Independent would have been very, very different. I think we would have lost the trust of our readers a long time ago. And I think it's because they see that we're not living out the bad things. We are writing about corruption, we are writing about misconduct and so on. It's because our readers see that we are writing about the things that they still trust the Kyiv Independent, and they trust us to present an honest, transparent picture of what is happening here.
I guess what Western audiences are interested in is the idea of how do you navigate the idea of how much you affect morale in your own country when you do report things that are not nice to hear.
As a journalist in Ukraine, when you're reporting about the war that is in your own country, that you're living through as you're reporting to it, you will always run into things like, am I gonna harm someone? Am I gonna harm Ukraine if this is reported? And I found that almost always the answer is no. Almost always the answer is that it's better, sometimes in the long-term perspective, sometimes immediately better to say something than not say something. It is what Ukrainians are fighting for. We're fighting for not being Russia, not being like Russia, not being part of that world and that system of values where there is no justice, there is no freedom of speech, freedom of media. It is so essential, I think, for Ukraine to stay true to the values that our soldiers are dying for. We have just recently hit the number of 12,000 members, which, again, may not sound crazy big, but it is quite big. It is knowing that 12,000 people are choosing to support us, and most of them are people who have nothing to do with Ukraine, who just want to support Ukraine, want to support independent journalism in Ukraine, but they don't have any personal connection, they don't have any personal stake in it, except that, Ukraine is fighting this war on behalf of the free world, and everybody sort of has a personal stake in it. So it's amazing that we've had this support, and we need to grow it further. We need to grow the support even more to be able to do more. For example, one of the things we have been able to do with the support of our readers is we launched a War Crimes Investigations Unit, which is a whole different team inside the Kyiv Independent that produces documentaries about Russian war crimes. And our thinking behind that was, how do you... it was beginning of 2023. We saw already that the world is kind of tired from reading the news about this is what's happening in the battlefield, or this is what it's like, this is it. How do you create something that can, take it the next step? How do you create something that can penetrate this war fatigue, something that can get to them and make their understanding of what is happening in Ukraine even deeper, and make their understanding of the war deeper? And for us, the answer was documentaries about Russian war crimes, which is a longer format. It takes several months to create one film. So this is our kitchen. As you see, some snacks and coffee, because coffee powers you. So this is the office that we moved in, I think, February 2023, South's second office of the Kyiv Independent. And it's a bit cramped now because we're growing, but when we moved in, it seemed like such a huge improvement after the first month. Over there is a map of the world, and there are little pins in it, and that's the location of our members, of people who support us. So we have a map of let's sure. So they're not actually pins. I think they are. Well, I think they're stickers. Yeah, they're stickers, and you see there's quite a lot in the UK actually.
And in the US.
And in the US, so yeah, the biggest areas where our supporters are in it's the US, and I think the UK is the second country with the biggest number of supporters. And then there's Canada, there's Western Europe, quite a lot in Germany actually, France, Scandinavian countries. But you see there are some. There's some in Africa, some in Nairobi, and then Southeast Asia, and
Japan as well has quite a few.
Yeah. We actually have a Japanese-Ukrainian journalist.
Amazing.
Sami Tajima, she covers Frontline for us. So yeah, there's a connection, so to say. And yeah, South America. So pretty much everywhere. Yeah, and there is even someone in Madagascar. We're launching today our e-store, where for the first time we will be selling merch, like the kind of t-shirts and tote bags and so on, which is why I'm wearing this t-shirt. It says Independence. It's part of that. If people buy a t-shirt there, they support our journalism.
Thank you very much, Julia, and of course, Olga Rudenko from the Kyiv Independent. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks as ever to our editor, Jack Jewers. Any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fp@monocle.com. We're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, you can subscribe to The Stack on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.